Do you know someone who's been involved with bad medicine on the REZ? I'm not just referring to things found around you, about curses and words being spoken out, the things about somebody falling and breaking their leg. No, I'm talking about real bad medicine, like about my friend who lost 3 family members within 3 weeks, 2 cousins, and 1 uncle. As soon as he told me this, I knew it had to do with bad medicine, with witchcraft. I remember my grandmother always said that death always comes in threes. She said we start to die the day that we're born, and that some things can only be found through a ceremony. I grew up very traditional, going to all the ceremonies as a kid, going to the sweat lodge 4 times, and following all the rules of the REZ that you've spoken on here about before. So when my friend told me this, I mentioned that maybe his family should come talk to my uncle, because it sounds like something is going on, some dark stuff, bad medicine type of things. He told me that it's what him and his mom were thinking, but that his dad didn't believe in that type of stuff. How sad. Anyways, a few weeks passed and he called me and told me that his sister's husband had passed away now as well. He said that his sister went into the kitchen late at night to get a drink of water. As she was getting water and she looked out the window, she saw some sort of bear with a humanoid face. She froze for a while and then screamed. She said her husband came running into the kitchen and also saw this thing, and he ran out the kitchen door and ran after it. This thing ran straight towards the mountain, straight up the face of a cliff. She said her husband couldn't believe it. It was impossible for any man to go up a cliff that way. 3 days later, her husband went missing. She said they heard noises outside their home, and he again went to go look around, and he didn't come back inside. His body was discovered later that day. The findings of the medical examiner deemed that someone had killed him. He died from trauma to the head, and they haven't found who killed him. So again, I told him that it sounds like something dark is going on, and that they should reach out to my uncle who practices medicine. My friend then mentioned that's actually why he's reaching out to me. He said that his dad finally bit into the traditional dogma and wanted to speak to him. These are his words, not mine. He told him everything that's been happening and the family members who've been dying. Basically, they did conduct a ceremony. I'm not sure what happened in the ceremony, but they didn't tell me. But my friend did share with me that my uncle said that someone in their family was starting to get involved in dark practices, and that's why these things were happening to them. Not only this, but someone had nailed the bladder of a goat to a tree that was struck by lightning. Inside of it were things that were linked to him and his family. And then my uncle said, once it falls, someone else in the family is gonna die. As for everything else that was happening, it was because of the state of the bladder. The more it decayed, the more terrible things were gonna happen. So my uncle gave them some kind of protection item to keep them safe in the meantime, and that in a few days, they would go out to find the tree. The next day they all went out, and as my uncle said, they did end up finding the tree. The tree itself was dead, fried by thunder. My uncle then approached the tree. Nailed to its burnt bark was a bladder of a goat, clustering brown dry blood and swarming with bugs. My friend said that his dad was about to touch it, and that's when my uncle shouted and said to not ever touch anything like this. My uncle then approached it. There's some things with some eagle feather, and then started praying. He then got it with a cloth and the nails popped out. The nails themselves didn't even look like normal nails, like the ones you buy from a store. After he got the bladder, he opened it, and inside, he finds bundles of hair, fragments of bones, even what looked to be a fang of a snake, and a picture of my friend's family. My uncle then said that whoever did this, it was out of jealousy. But not only this, it will now come back twofold, and that they're gonna find out who it was pretty soon. I know it's difficult, but pray for them. Forgiveness is better, because only Creator can give or take it. You shouldn't be saying someone's name after they have passed away, just like you should get rid of their belongings and burn their clothes when they pass. You don't want to disturb them or confuse them by saying their name. they're actually starting their new journey. These are teachings that my grandma gave me. Like, did you know that their spirit sticks around for 4 days? They go visit the places that meant something to them. That's another reason you need to cover your mirrors as well, especially in those 4 days. It actually makes me just want to get rid of mirrors overall, to be honest. Don't wash your own clothes and such until after the 4 days have passed. I even told some friends in the past about the burning of clothes, and they told me that they didn't know. But they actually weren't familiar at all about the whole getting rid of stuff, especially the burning of clothes. Another thing my grandma said was to not cry because it will cause the spirits to stick around, to actually try to be near you and longer. She even told me a story of a mom and daughter where the daughter keeps crying after her mother's death. One night, the mom comes to her and tells her she needs to keep her head up, and something about stop crying because she can't pass on to the spirit world. You see, it's an adjustment for them. After they return to our ancestors, it can be a very busy time in the world. For now, give that family member some time to fully adjust to the other side. So now back to the burning of clothes, personal belongings of those who are no longer with us, especially items that were close to them, such as clothes or possessions. They all need to be burned or destroyed. My grandma said it helps release the spirit from attachments to the physical world, and to also stop any lingering energy that can affect us. It's been a while since my grandma passed on. My parents aren't very traditional, and I'm really trying to go back and learn as much as I can. Has anybody else heard of similar things to do when a relative passes? I don't care if you believe me. This whole thing is gonna sound completely unreal, almost like a fever dream. Nobody believes me, but someone might know just what the hell happened here. So I had turned 19, and I decided to go visit my grandfather in North Michigan. A bit of backstory about my grandfather. He lives in a cabin. I never really knew him too well. I only saw him a few times. All I already know about him is that back in the 70s, he was in Vietnam. When I was 17, he confessed to me that he felt terrible about the things that he had to do over there. He was told to beat somebody with a shovel until he died. After that, I kinda just would avoid him. I was too freaked out to talk to him. I guess the old guilt caught up with him and kinda affected his mind. But now, he knew that he was nearing the end of his life. He was having some health issues and refused medication. He did invite me over since I'm his last living relative, and he wanted to spend some time with me before he passed. At first I didn't want to, but I decided that this is what my father would have wanted. After about 3 hours of driving, I get to his cabin. It's a nice area. It looked almost like it was made out of Lincoln logs or something. He's waiting outside, smoking a pipe, and rocking in some chair, suspenders and all, like somebody you'll see who's a stereotypical of an old farmer guy. But he looks exhausted. I can see dark circles under his saggy eyes. He gets up and gives me a big bear hug. He's trying to hug me as hard as he can, but he can barely walk, and I can see that he's very weak. We hug for a few minutes, mostly because I find it too awkward to break away. I remind myself that even though I only remember him for a few years, he's known me most of my life. Halfway through, he starts kind of breathing heavy on me. He sniffles. I realize that he's been crying silently. He breaks away and says, "Come inside, son." I go inside to a very cozy cabin. It's getting cold, especially in Michigan, so he has the fire going. He has running water, a gas stove, and 2 beds. One of them is very new. I think he bought it just for me. After a few minutes, I begin to care for him. I kind of begin to remember my grandfather, if that makes sense. The bond of family becomes newly important. That's when I decide to be his living helper until he dies. That very day, he starts to make some decaf, but halfway through, he starts to sweat. I help him sit down by the fire and finish the coffee. My coffee tastes terrible, but he's still very appreciative. He assures me it's delicious. After the decaf, we get ready for bed. He lies on the small bed and tells me to sleep on the new one. When I tell him that we should switch, he refuses. I guess he did buy it for me. He then said his prayers and goes to sleep. I can't stand it. watching this old dying man, my own flesh and blood, sleeping on that pile of junk. He's quite small and frail, even though he's not thin. So with a bit of effort, I was able to lift him up gently and tuck him into the big bed. I moved the small bed to the window and I make sure to sleep facing it. That way the sun wakes me up. When the sun does wake me up, it's like 6 a.m. I slide the bed back and switch my grandpa back. I then lay on the good bed for another 20 minutes before I realized that I can't fall asleep again. All that lifting woke me up, so I decided to make some breakfast, and I end up packing his pipe as well. I go to the outhouse near the cabin because the flushing might wake him up. When I'm done, I step outside, and then notice something behind this cabin. It seems like a gate holding 6 black horses. They're shackled in these massive metal chains. Each horse has a huge metal ring around their necks. They're all chained together to the ground. Since it is 6 a.m. and the forest is dark, they actually look really creepy, like something straight out of hell. I thought that maybe it was a trick of the light, but their faces looked all kinds of screwed up. Their eyes looked almost red. I thought it might just be a reflection, almost like how cameras show some red pupils. I stepped back inside to find my grandpa awake, sitting on his bed. I talked about what we were going to do for the day. He said his back felt good enough today that he might want to do some fishing. Not to stroke my own ego, but I do attribute that to me, letting him sleep on the good bed. After a breakfast of eggs and bacon, I drive him to a pond near the house. We fish for a while, just silent the entire time. It wasn't awkward though, it was a comfortable silence. I didn't catch anything, but he caught a 3-pounder. I had to help him reel it in. He was very proud of himself, and it actually made me happy. He said that he used to love to go out fishing. I told him that we would make it into dinner. On the drive back, I asked him about the horses. I had kind of forgotten about them since the early morning. Instantly, I knew I shouldn't have brought this up. His smile was replaced with a kind of stern grin. He told me not to worry about it, and that they were just some sort of pets. I almost listened to him, except he nervously quivered when he said, "Worry never happened before or after." So I doubt that it was just an old man thing. He showed me how to gut and debone the fish. We marinated and dry rubbed for about 30 minutes while he was out there puffing on his pipe. When he was doing this, I opened the curtains to the back window and peered at the horses. They hadn't moved at all. They hadn't even ate or slept. They didn't look cold, but they were still shooting hot breath from their nose. I know because it was cold. I saw it. I then stepped outside to talk to my grandpa about the horses. "Did you not feed the horses or something?" He then says, "You don't feed those horses, son. Not this type." I had no clue what he meant by that. Every time that I inquired, he would just ignore me or change the subject. When he was done, we stepped inside and had our dinner. I then noticed that he prayed extra long that night. The next morning, I just woke up with the sun, and I put my grandpa back into his bed. I decided to get a bit closer to the horses this time. I got just barely close enough so I could see them. I don't even think they noticed me. Remembering it now, it sent shivers down my spine. It was terrifying. They had shaggy, matted fur, deformed and bent out of shaped skulls. I know for sure that their rib cages should have not been indented like that. Their teeth looked like they had been chewing on rocks or something. It wasn't just their appearance. I've been around deformed animals before. It doesn't really bother me so much. But these things had a really screwed up presence. Like the feeling in your stomach after you watch some really screwed up things on the internet. Or like you see someone die. Initially, I felt bad for them. But now I didn't even want to see them. Strange enough, I also wanted to get closer. But I couldn't do it. One of them looked at me in the eyes. And if I hadn't just used the bathroom, I most likely would have pissed myself. I ran back into the cabin to hide. Grandpa was just starting to wake up, so I tried forgetting about it and got to work. Today was a supply day, meaning that we were going to go into town to refill on food and other small things. I decided to buy Grandpa a cake as well. Not for any special reason, just that it's nice to have some fun while he could. He always gets someone to deliver food for him, but it was good to get some exercise. Plus, his back was feeling better. We rode into town, and that's when Grandpa said that he was getting sick. The poor guy hadn't been in the car for years. Maybe motion sickness got to him, but we had to pull over. After that, I realized that we had to go quick. We picked everything up and I hid the cake from Grandpa to surprise him with it at the cabin. When we got back, something was wrong. There's a racket coming from the back of the cabin. I then pulled the car up and stepped outside. The horses are going nuts. Later on the floor behind them are some kind of white balls. Grandpa then tells me very sternly to get in the fucking cabin. Shouldn't we drive away? And he said, son, the worst thing we can do right now is try to escape. I have no clue what the hell he's on about. When we get inside, he starts explaining. Now, remember, he's an old man, and he's also injured, so I can barely understand him. He starts talking about how he didn't know that they were there when he bought the cabin. But if he leaves, he's gonna die. They must have ate something, from what I can piece together through everything that he's told me. If you feed them, they get stronger, and they can draw things in better. He said the most that we can do is hope that they run out of things to eat. Then, there was a snap, a loud crack like a whipping snapping through the air. Grandpa goes silent. I then say, what the hell was that? He stares at me kinda empty like, well, looking back at it, he was accepting his death. He then says, one of them broke the chains. I then said, what the hell are you talking about? He then looks at me and says, behind you. I whip around, facing the building. Son, you're a good kid. And then I lose consciousness, and I wake up with the sun beaming on my face. I wake up in a pile of my own blood. There's a crowbar at my side. My headache is terrible. I touch the back of my head. It's just a flesh wound. I pick myself up and try not to vomit. I sit down and try to come to. Everything hurts. I'm freezing. Then I think, wait, why am I freezing? The right wall of the cabin is full of holes. It almost looks like someone threw boulders through the wall. I then think, where's Grandpa? There's no sign of him. I open the door and step outside. I check behind, and the gates have been trampled. The chains are broken. I get closer. Those white things that were all crushed up were just rabbits. The horses would have chewed them and then spit them out. I start to piece everything together, and I throw up a few times. Long story short, I walked back to the cabin and picked up a few things. I picked up my grandpa's pipe and his bluegrass tobacco. I found the golden cross that he kept in his cabinet. I drove home without stopping. The next day, I called up a delivery boy, and I asked him to deliver to the house so I could see if I dreamed the whole thing. After a while, he calls me and is asking what house I was talking about. He said that there used to be a house there, but it's been burned down for years. Guys, I have no idea what the hell happened that day. I'm sitting here smoking his pipe. Honestly, it's the only proof that any of this ever happened. My therapist can't explain it, since I literally have his pipe as physical evidence. My priest can't explain it since there's no record of demonic horses, or anything as far as we know. My friends just tell me that I'm full of shit. I'm not even sure what else to do. What the hell happened back there? I live in Pennsylvania and I spend time hiking up in the Poconos. My friend who I used to go hiking with went down to Appalachian State University. He's always telling me how I should come down for some inner woods fun. So in the summer of 2006, I drive down from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to spend the week backpacking. He introduces me to his friends and we get stupid drunk the first night, having a great time and all. The next day we start getting stuff together to go on a hike. So we should have started around 8 a.m., but we ended up not getting out until 1 p.m., simply because of all of us being hungover. We plan to stay out there for 4 nights. We split up the gear evenly among us, and one of the guy's girlfriends drives us out there to the start of the trail. The trail ends up being a little more than a game path. We all tell her that we'll call her to pick us up from a diner. that's on the other side of the park from a payphone. Now, I was in decent shape. I have never smoked a day in my life, and I had a decent amount of hiking under my belt. Even though we weren't that high, I'm still huffing and puffing like a chain smoker. They ended up going at a steady pace, and I was struggling to keep on. They keep asking if I'm alright, and I just tell them that I'm getting used to the elevation change. I struggle to keep up in the late afternoon, and it's almost getting to dusk. Never have I pushed myself so hard as I am right now. My heart beats in my ears, my vision is getting blurry, and they all keep stopping for me to catch up. The rest of the group is trying to push for a campsite, and it happens to be me that's slowing them down. I end up dragging further and further behind the group, every time they look back, telling them it's okay for them to keep going. My friend comes back and tells me that the group is going to go ahead of us and get a campsite going, and he's going to stay back with me. I tell him to go on, I should be alright. He tells me it's not that big of a deal, and that they understand the elevation differences and stuff. At this point, I never felt worse in my whole life. I couldn't even catch my breath. I had a pounding headache. I couldn't even see right. I couldn't go on even if I wanted to. He tells me to sit down and take a rest. We'll catch up to them at whatever campsite they pick. They all said that we should be able to see the campsite from the trail. So I sit down, trying to catch my breath. I close my eyes for what feels like a moment. When I open them, it's pitch black out. I call out for my friend, but there's no answer. I still feel terrible, but just a little bit better than before. I fumble out the headlamp. The high, medium, and low modes don't work. Only moonlight mode works. It does this when the battery is low. I strap it on. It's bright enough to follow the trail anyways, which is a good thing. I glance at my watch. It's 1 a.m. I've been out here for a long time. I call out for my friend again, but there's no answer. I'm starting to get a little freaked out, but I figured that he went to the camp. It shouldn't be that far off. I start off at a slow pace, keeping my breathing in check. I'm watching my footing. I hiked the trail for about an hour. There's no sign of my friends. I started to wonder if I'm even on the trail at all. I'm thinking that I should do some backtracking, but I decide against it. I go on for a bit. There's still no signs of my group, and I'm getting less and less sure of being on the trail. I look back at my watch. It still says 1 a.m. That's when I realize it's broken, and I notice that the day is off. It says Monday, and we started off on Friday. I start panicking, and I just yell my friend's name as loud as I can. There's no answer. I decided to go against my judgment and backtrack to where I started from. Somehow, I ended up on a path up on a ridge. Never in my life have I seen so few signs of humanity. I can only really see what I think is a city way off in the distance. I started thinking about just heading down the ridge towards the city. I start heading down the mountain towards the slope, towards the light. However, as I get just a little ways down, the light disappears behind the tree line. At this point, I'm panicking about being lost. I'm pushing myself too much at the elevation that I was not adjusted to. Halfway down the slope, I hear something from the top of the ridge. I say something because I'm not sure what I heard, but I did hear something. It sounded almost like a log being dropped. I can't see the trails I was on, but I thought it was most likely my friends. I start yelling at the top of my lungs. That's when I hear somebody yell back. But at that time, it didn't occur to me that that yell didn't sound like anyone from my group. I was just happy that I got found. I then start saying, "Guys, I'm coming back up. Don't move." I start trying to get back up the ridge. I'm struggling, pushing myself hard again. I'm about half the distance to the top of the ridge when I stop, and I try to see my friend's flashlight. My headlamp is on moonlight mode, so I can't really see anything. I then see what I think is a figure coming towards me. I think it's my friend, and I was getting really scared. I stop as I look, and this figure was not human. It was too big and not the right shape. It looked too slender in some parts. Now, my headlamp does this thing where if the battery is low, it will only shine moonlight mode, but if I switch it over to turbo, it will light up for about half a second before kicking back down to moonlight mode. I reach up and switch my light to turbo to light up the figure. The bright flash was enough to light up this thing in front of me, about 30 feet up the slope. What I remember most was that it had a face that almost looked like a possum. but it was bigger than a human head. I screamed out the worst scream I had in me, and I turned around and started running down the slope. I only got 5 steps in before I tripped and rolled down the slope. Things get really hazy at this point. I remember coming to a stop in a sharp pain coming from my head down to my neck. It felt like I was being stabbed. I was laying on my belly, trying to move down the rest of the slope. Every time that I tried to look back, the pain in my neck would almost make me pass out. I do remember, though, hearing something coming up on me as I crawled. I was moving so slow that anything that wanted me could definitely catch up pretty quick. My head was spinning. The pain was unbearable in my neck, and I was struggling to catch my breath. I felt like the thing was right on top of me. At this point, my body stopped listening to me, and I couldn't move anymore. I think I passed out there for a while. It's hard to tell. I slowly pushed myself over my back. I still only have moonlight mode on. I can't really see. I try to reach up to my headlamp to try the turbo mode again, but before my arm gets to it, the shooting pain in my neck brings my arm back down. I lay on my back for a while, trying to see or hear anything up on the slope, but I hear nothing. I slowly start to get up. Every time that I flex my neck, it gets a crippling pain in my body. I start shuffling down the rest of the slope, going from tree to tree and leaning against them. I'm in pure panic at this point, even crying, just straight up sobbing. I'm trying to rack my brain on what to do. I keep trying to head straight to where I think I saw the lights, the town where the college is in. After a while, my sobbing slowly stops, and I start to be able to think normally. I'm trying to figure out how bad my neck is hurt and how far I have to go. I'm resting on a tree. I close my eyes for a second, and then suddenly, I feel something on my back. I turn around, and I swing my arms the best that I can. I get blinded by light. I'm still swinging and kicking with this light blowing in my eyes. I end up on the ground, my arms being held on my side. Pain is in my neck. It's making me sick, but I keep trying to struggle. My eyes start to adjust, and it turns out that it's my friend and one of the hiking buddies. They're talking about something, but I can't hear them. I nod my head, and they let go. I keep saying that I can't hear them. They look at me like I'm missing a face or something. The other guy takes some water out of his bag and gives it to me. I drink it, trying to tell them everything that happened. I keep saying that my neck is hurt. They help me up and we start walking. They keep saying something to me. I can just barely now make out what they're saying. Slowly, we get back to the campsite. My hearing is coming back a little bit. I sit down on a log to rest. I then ask my friend, "Why did you end up leaving me?" He then says that he didn't. He says he couldn't wake me up, and then he ran to the campsite to get help. But when he came back, I was just gone. I tell them what happened. Both of them then look at me like I'm crazy. I ask where the others are at. They tell me that they're also looking for me. I started to feel silly about telling them what I saw. I'm starting to think it was just my head playing tricks on me. My neck starts to feel a little bit better. I start asking about what time the others will be back. They said they would return around midnight. I tell them that I'm going to sleep for a bit. I fall asleep pretty quickly by laying down by the fire. My friend then wakes me up looking scared as hell. The other guys came back, and they were packing everything up. My friend then says, "We gotta go, right now." Like, right fucking now. I heard the guys that were looking for me talking about how they were being followed in the woods, and they also kept seeing something. I wake up and I ask them, "Did it look like a possum?" The guys just stare at me and then he goes, "We gotta get the fuck out of here right now." We hike it the way we came. Once again, I'm slower than the group. Only this time, my friend actually stays with me. The rest of the group goes out of sight. He then says, "Don't worry, man. I'm not leaving you." I keep stopping to catch my breath and rest my neck. My friend's staying with me. He doesn't even rush me. He then says, "Don't worry, man. I've been out in these woods at night so many times. I can get us back." We keep moving at a slow pace. My friend keeps saying stuff like, "You guys just got spooked. There's a lot of things out here in the woods that go bump in the night." I'm resting with my back against a tree. My friend's just looking around and waiting for me. I then look at him. and he looks behind me. His face is frozen. He then says, "We have to move a little faster." At this point, he turns and gets my backpack strap and starts pulling me along. I don't question it. I just push as hard as I can. After running for what seems like forever, we finally get to the road, and we see the group huddle around a payphone. They called one of the guy's girlfriends for a ride. She shows up and takes me right to the hospital. I keep trying to tell her the story of what happened. We all do, but she doesn't buy it. To this day, we still talk about what happened, but none of us go around that area no more. I don't even go into any woods at night anymore. The weird thing is that my friend, he still keeps going back there. I think that's pretty weird. You should never have parties with strangers on the REZ. Not just strangers, but with people you just truly don't know. Nowadays, I don't let coworkers or people I don't really know into my house. I know better, and this is all because of something that happened in my past, what I've gone through. These experiences have made me into who I am now. I came upon a story on here about the devil. I'm sure that you, as many others on the REZ, have heard the stories about him. Some see him as a man in a trench coat and hat. Others see him as a good-looking person that women fall head over heels for. Someone who buys the whole bar a drink. Other people describe him as a stranger who gives them anything they need or anything they want. You know, all the very cliche type of stuff. Not to discredit anybody or their experience, but I have a story myself about an encounter with him, or whatever this thing was. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was something else. I can't really confirm it, but I do think it was somewhat pure evil because of what happened after that encounter. The reason I say this is because I used to live a crazy life. Drugs, alcohol, all those things make you open to these forces out there, the ones that we can't always see. I have had ceremonies done in the past so that I could leave, but I also had to change my lifestyle. You can't expect for these things to just disappear through a ceremony. The ceremony is done to cleanse and heal and figure stuff out, but at the end of it, you also have to play your part, and that's the main goal for all of us who are struggling, right? Fighting every day. At least that's what I try to do every day of my life. It's not easy, and some days are difficult. I have learned to just take everything one day at a time, leaning on the Creator every single day as I walk the red road. Well, anyways, I changed my life. I quit drinking and doing drugs as well, but I still had to work, and I was a bartender. I know, you might be calling me a hypocrite, but it's complicated and weird, and I don't want to make this story too long, but God is not done with me yet. All this change doesn't happen overnight, and trust me, change is still happening, and I didn't stay working there at the bar for too long. One night, it was just me bartending, and there were a few customers sitting around, drinking and eating, including my friend Robbie. Robbie was always there at the bar. That's what it seemed like, especially when I was bartending. I think he just wanted to get some free drinks the best that he could. The bar was kinda lonely, not like some other days. There was this random guy who walked in and sat at the bar. The crazy thing about it was that it seemed like the lights dimmed, and the jukebox started playing really fast. Actually, a different song started playing, but you get the point. I just had an ugly feeling from him. So he ordered a drink. He looked at me with this weird look. I'm not sure. It just felt strange. Anyways, he grabbed this drink and went to go sit down at a table. I kept my eye on him because, you know, as a bartender, you should always be mindful of your surroundings. I kept looking his way every now and then. He just seemed weird. He was dressed normal, just a normal looking dude. He was just sitting there, drinking. And I swear at some point he had his head down, and it seemed like he started praying. At least that's what it seemed like. After a few minutes he started pulling out a deck of cards, and he was just shuffling away. Some of the guys around there got closer to him when they saw he had a deck of cards, and that he was by himself. Even Robbie went over there at some point. Maybe because I wasn't giving him my whole attention, he started doing card tricks and then began telling people their future. How do I know this? Because, as time went on, Robbie came up to the bar to get more drinks, and he said to put it on the man's tab. Robbie told me that this guy that walked in, he's telling everyone their future. He knows stuff that's happened in the past that nobody would know. I looked at Robbie as he was telling me this, and I told him to be careful. People who mess with stuff like that, they're using powers that we don't understand. It's about what's behind them. You never know what kind of spirits or forces they're communicating with, and we should leave those things alone. In our culture, we have a deep respect for the spiritual side of things, and we're always reminded that not everything is meant to be digged into. These are all teachings from the elders that talk about the dangers of using bad medicine or manipulating things for personal gain. I remember one of the things I was told at a past ceremony was to never accept any kind of gift from a stranger, words, or a physical gift, even any sort of blessing. I mean, even outside the REZ, everyone knows this, especially when they seem too good to be true. Any gift, any favor, they're not always free. Robbie told me that I was looking into it too much, and that I was overthinking it, and he kept saying it was just some drunk guy doing tricks and telling stories to pass time, and that I was overthinking it. A small group eventually got around him, and Robbie kept coming up, and he told me that he kept asking about me, and that he also wanted to see my future as well. I declined, because, based off of everything that I just said. The man stayed for a while. After a few hours, yes, it was a few hours, the man stood up, gathered his cards, and he came up to the bar for the tab. He then walked out as quietly just like he came in. Robbie came to say goodbye as it was closing hour, and then we all went about our own business. Days, weeks, months went by. I found me a different job, and me and Robbie kind of stopped talking, I guess because I no longer worked at the bar. Again, this town on the REZ is not big. Everyone knows everyone. I say this because within the next 2 years, and maybe I'm overlooking it, but to this day, I will forever be grateful that I denied that request at the bar, because every single person whose future he read is gone. Not days after, not weeks, not months, but about 2 years later, one after another, all within a short time frame. They all died. Some of them were really good people. I got to know them, including my friend Robbie, who died in a car crash head on. I know it sounds like a crazy messed up story, especially because who else was there? To everyone else, it seemed just like random deaths that occurred. But I know everyone who died within those few months were the same people talking with that man at the bar. He didn't have a trench coat. I didn't see a tail or deer feet or anything. I know it was him. I do wonder when someone randomly passes away on the REZ, if there was something going on behind closed doors that we don't know about. It's not a coincidence that every single person surrounding that man at the bar passed away in 1 year. What do you all think? Have you ever came across something like this? Or a person who offers somebody something, and then sometime later, that person ends up passing away? So, I have a story to tell, and I'm not sure if you all will believe me, but I have learned to not talk about skinwalkers, which in my defense, I'm not exactly talking about them. I'm just giving you all a warning. So I'll get straight to the point. Me and a group of friends decided to go camping at the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona. We were gathered around the campfire, talking about various topics, and of course, being right next to the Navajo Nation. The subject of skinwalkers and other things regarding the Navajo people was brought up. Questions as to why they're so secretive about these things. I know you all heard the tales and the stories about not sharing anything about them, and how they don't like to talk about skinwalker stuff with people outside the REZ. Anyways, we were surrounded by a dense forest, and looking at the stars above us, everything was so beautiful. As we started drinking and smoking, and the night deepened, my friend Cliff excused himself to step into the woods to go take a leak. And well, I know most guys know, but if you're a lady reading this, it doesn't take long to use the bathroom for us men. So anyways, a few minutes turned into 5, and then 10, and then 15, and it wasn't like him to be gone for so long. I mean, I know alcohol makes you go to the bathroom a lot, and we're not really into pulling pranks into each other. So armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the trees, the same direction that I saw Cliff go. As I was walking, I was also calling for him. I walked for about 2 or 3 minutes into the trees, and there was nothing. There was only silence. There were no noises from anything, no insects, nothing. Then, I heard it. His voice. I knew it was him. I followed the sound and I started shouting for him. I thought he might have been hurt or something. So I kept calling out to him, and I kept hearing his voice. Over here. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing where I saw Cliff standing still, just looking up at the stars above him. "Hey, check this out, man," Cliff mentioned, motioning and pointing to the sky. "What the hell are you doing, Cliff?" I approached, with my flashlight aimed at his back. As I was coming out the tree line to him, that's when I felt something on my shoulder from behind. I jumped, and that's when I saw Cliff. Confusion set in. I shined my flashlight to the other person who I thought was Cliff, but when I looked at him, he was facing us. It was undeniably humanoid, but horribly wrong. Its eyes, unblinking, it reflected the light without any sign of life. Its mouth was wide open, and as the beam of light hit its face, its movements became erratic, jerking towards us at a slow speed. Stumbling but trying to walk like a human would, panic surged through me and Cliff. We turned and fled through the darkness, driven by fear. We didn't stop to look back until we reached the safety of our campsite. We started shouting to the other two before we even got there. As we got to them, we started screaming that we gotta go. And so I don't even know if we packed up everything, but we got the fuck out of there. I have no idea what the hell that was. But after that encounter, we decided to never go camping again. Me and my friends have talked about what we possibly encountered that night, and we done research, and we all came to the conclusion that it must have been a skinwalker. So let this be the last time I ever mention this word itself. I don't mess with skinwalkers anymore. I don't talk about them. I know they might be trending right now with TikTok, but be careful. There's a reason the Navajo people don't talk about these things. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Like I said, you might not believe me, but that I'll leave up to you. I love summer. It's my favorite time of the year. I know some people prefer a different season, and those other ones are great too. But for me, there's just something relaxing about a warm summer day. Almost every year or so, a few of my friends and I have a little get together. We all take some time off from work and plan some sort of event. Last year was Eric's world famous barbecue party. Everything was great until Eric set a stack of paper plates on fire, and those blew into the various table covers we had arranged. We managed to curtail the fires before they had time to spread any further, but that didn't stop the fire department from showing up anyway. The year before that, Jimmy invited us over to his house for a pool party. He has a very nice in-ground pool, but none of us actually swam in it. We mostly just hung around his minibar, just drinking and chatting away. Nothing outrageous happened during that party, except for Eric's failed cannonball attempt. I could go on and on about all the events we experienced in the past, but I'm here to talk about what happened during my event last month. Like I mentioned previously, we had all taken some time off work, and it was my turn to decide what we would all do. We usually didn't take turns choosing like this, but no one seemed to come up with a different plan. I had been browsing through different destination spots and activities around my area. After searching for around an hour or two, I stumbled across a rather interesting post. Someone was renting out a lake house about an hour's drive north. Looking through the photos and glancing over the price, I knew right away this is what I wanted to do. I called the place and I got it rented out for the weekend. The woman on the phone sounded very excited about me renting the property. After finalizing everything, I called everyone else and told them my plan. They were all almost as excited as the woman. Eric wanted to bring his grill with him so he could barbecue one day, and Jimmy brought some fishing gear so we could lounge by the lake. Our other friend Peter tagged along with us as well. He isn't a very outdoors type of person, but he still offered to come with us. We each arrived at the lake house about mid-afternoon. The sun wasn't quite setting yet, which was good as it gave us a bit of time to survey the area and inspect the house itself. The house was much larger than I expected for the price I paid to rent it. It seemed like I had gotten a really good deal. It was between the massive lake and the crowded woods behind it. Only a solitary dirt trail cuts through the tree line, leading to and from the house itself. Eric was already unloading his grill not 5 minutes after he arrived, while Jimmy, Peter, and I entered the house. The inside of the house was very rustic, but I knew this much from the photos. Different types of mounted animals on the high walls. The living room area was quite large. It looked almost like a recreation hall. A wooden staircase wrapped along one edge, leading up to multiple bedrooms. An expansive kitchen took up the other half of the bottom floor, as well as a decent-sized bathroom. It looked like this place was designed for big groups of people to just enjoy and have fun. After exploring the house for a bit, I went outside and took in the surroundings. It was such a peaceful evening as I stood there taking in the fresh air. That's when I noticed something strange. Apart from Eric trying to mess around with his grill, there was no sound coming from the forest. I couldn't hear any birds, animals, or even insects. I could barely hear the sound from the lake nearby. Even though it was weird, I tried not to think too much of it. An hour or so passed by, and after eating some burnt steaks that Eric so graciously made for us, we each retired to our bedrooms. Sleeping in a new place always made me feel a bit nervous. I may be the only one, but whenever I stay in a hotel or at a friend's place, it always takes me forever to fall asleep, at least during the first night. This isn't really a major issue, as it doesn't keep me from traveling. The bedrooms were quite nice, minimal, yet decent. They had a small wooden frame bed, a style dresser, and a nightstand with a small lamp. And on the far wall was a long window that overlooked the trees and the lake. I was lying there, letting my mind wander as my eyes danced around my room. I wasn't even staring at anything. I was just trying to take in my surroundings so I could fall asleep more easily next time. Minutes slowly ticked by, and I started to feel my eyelids close before a faint of movement out of the corner of my eye caused me to open them once again. I couldn't be sure, but I thought for a split second I saw someone standing outside my window. But that couldn't be possible, as the bedrooms were on the second floor, and it was a straight drop down to the dirt below. My eyes locked onto the window, but after focusing for a bit, there was nothing out there. The next day, we all got up bright and early. There wasn't a whole lot to do aside from wandering around the property, so that's what I did. Eric was already prepping some food, while Pete and Jimmy had started day drinking. I stood outside the wooden porch with a cup of coffee, looking out to the tree line nearby. I once again let my eyes drift around as I sipped my coffee, and once again, there wasn't any sound, which I still thought was strange. I wonder why it was so quiet in the woods, a place that is often filled with the sounds of life. As my eyes drifted, I spotted a bit of movement in the distance. It looked like something large, moving quickly through the trees. I thought it might have been a bear, but before I could adjust my gaze, whatever it was had disappeared further into the trees. The rest of the day was uneventful. We spent most of the time down near the lake, drinking and fishing. Eric had made us some burgers, which actually weren't terrible, and before we knew it, the sun had faded. We all went to our bedrooms for the night, and I didn't have much trouble falling asleep this time around. 10 minutes after I had drifted off, I was startled awake by the sounds of screaming. My eyes cracked open and I sat up, looking around in the darkness. It took me a minute to recognize the voice. It was Jimmy. As I opened my bedroom door, I saw Eric opening his as well. We each gave each other a confused look before going to Jimmy's door and knocking. After receiving no answer, I opened his door. "Jimmy?" I called out. Jimmy was sitting on the floor, wide-eyed, covered in sweat. I asked him what was wrong. However, he wouldn't turn to look at me. His eyes seemed to be fixed on something else. Eric and I both glanced over in unison towards his window, and that's when I heard Eric, over my shoulder, shout, "What the fuck is that?" I didn't say anything. I just felt my muscles tighten. On the other side of Jimmy's window was a figure. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. With the faint bit of moonlight outside, I could just barely see its face. I know this is gonna sound very weird, but its face was almost dog-like in appearance. It had a long nose and beady, hollow eyes. From what I could tell, its body was completely hairless. Not sure if it was just the moonlight outside or what, but its skin was a dark gray color with a bluish tint to it. Its eyes continuously darted from each of us, almost like someone hopped up on caffeine. It was creepy how jittery this thing was. It felt like an eternity for all of us sitting there, watching this thing watch us. Then, it started to descend from the window. Jimmy and Eric didn't move a muscle, yet for some reason, I felt drawn to the window. I peered outside and I saw it. Despite its massive size, it crawled down the side of the house like a spider. It crawled on all fours as it made its way to the ground below. Its hands were strangely human in appearance, but its hind legs were those of an animal, like a dog or maybe a wolf. Its head turned back to look up at the house, and I could just faintly see its beady eyes, darting around before it took off into the woods, disappearing beyond the darkened tree line. Eric, Jimmy, and I all sat there, staring at each other for a few moments before Peter came stumbling into the room, asking what the hell was going on. None of us said anything, but we all did end up sleeping in the same bedroom for the rest of the evening. The following day, as we all packed up to leave, I couldn't help but stare at the strange footprints in the dirt, leading off into the forest. What made me nervous wasn't the fact that these footprints confirmed that what we saw that night was real, but there were at least 10 more identical yet separate tracks, leading off in various directions. It's been close to a month since that, and I've been trying my best to forget about the whole event. I still have no idea what that thing was, but I doubt I'll be renting any more houses by a forest. I never really knew my grandma's brother well. All I can remember is that he was a real energetic man who lived on the hill where my grandparents resided, in the Navajo REZ, not far from the Chaco Wash. My grandma's brother used to reside a couple of miles north of my grandparents' place. His dwelling, more like a shack, sat on the outskirts of the Badlands. When we were young, we were instructed to steer clear of this place, because it was considered evil. I never questioned why. I just accepted the warning and avoided the area. As time went by, my grandma's brother passed away under strange circumstances. He was found dead in his house. Even though he would occasionally visit my grandparents, his absence for a few days was unusual. My older uncle went to his house and discovered his lifeless body. What was strange was the hasty funeral arrangements that followed. Normally, in Navajo tradition, funerals are held on the fourth day after the person's passing, but in this case, the funeral was conducted immediately, without even informing the family. Curiosity led me to sneak over to his house to see what it looked like inside before it was torn down, as per my grandmother's request. The inside of the house felt eerie. It was a one-room, shed-like structure with faded and some bleached wooden boards for walls. The boards didn't fit tightly, allowing sunlight to filter in, illuminating the floating dust particles. The bed was modest, adorned with a green army blanket. There weren't that many decorations, mostly old shearing tools and knives, with no photographs in sight. An old wood stove and a small table occupied the space, alongside two crates at the far end of the room. One wooden crate laid open, revealing its contents, while the other, made of metal, was locked. After my brief exploration, I left the house, noting its vantage point, overlooking the Badlands to the west. Several years passed, and my older uncle decided to build his dream house on the exact site where my grandmother's brother had lived. Despite my grandmother's concerns about the location, my uncle was determined to proceed with the construction. He envisioned a single-story ranch-style house, equipped with all modern stuff, which was actually very rare on the REZ. The construction began, and everything seemed to progress easy at first. However, strange occurrences soon began to fall on the workers. Tools would go missing, and they said that there would be shadows moving within the house, and blood was discovered smeared on the walls. Even stranger were the tracks found in the sand around the house, leading from the west towards the Badlands. My uncle, an experienced hunter, couldn't identify these tracks, so he looked for help with my grandpa, who also found them perplexing. Eventually, my grandma intervened, recognizing the signs of a skinwalker. She instructed my uncle on the necessary precautions, and work on the house stopped until this issue could be resolved. Despite being careful, strange events continued to happen in the house, but my uncle pressed on. He eventually completed the house, and even yet, the disturbances persisted, driving his family to discomfort and fear. Even my grandmother's attempts to calm the spirits seemed futile against whatever forces were at play. On one specific evening, my cousins and I stayed over, and we experienced firsthand the strange nature of this house. The generator was shut off, and then strange noises echoed through the darkness, and it almost felt like some presence seemed to stalk us from the shadows. Only the intervention of my grandparents, armed with traditional remedies and fierce determination, brought us relief from all of this. Another incident involved my younger cousin. She was alone in the truck outside, and she said as she looked to the west side of the house, she saw a pale, humanoid figure peering down at her with dark, soulless eyes. Her screaming alerted the family to come outside, but this creature had vanished before they could confront it. Even with my grandmother, a woman of great strength, she had vowed to confront whatever was there and expel it from the house. My grandma was very traditional and practiced native medicine. She also used sacred crystals to find and heal people. While looking into her crystals, she would also practice reading people's hands
There's been a few instances where she has been used to locate missing people and also found the circumstances of the way the person died. She also had knowledge of the evil way, the dark practice of witchcraft. In need of medicine, my grandma had acquired a few secret items and would seek help from another medicine man. They both went into the house and began a ceremony to expel whatever was in it. They went into each room, blessing them with sage and sealing them with ash. When they finally went into the master bedroom, the medicine man started to vomit and bleed from the nose. My grandma said that she had a nauseous feeling and felt dizzy, almost fainting. They both retreated from the room and closed the door, sealing it with ash. The medicine man said the room was the source of evil, attracting evil spirits, including skinwalkers. He said he would try to pinpoint where the evil was coming from, but would need to go in alone. He began by lighting up a medicine bundle, taking bitter root, and marking his forehead with ash before entering the room. He described the room as very cold, feeling the presence of numerous spirits in the closet. Upon opening the closet, he saw a black mist on the floor, swirling like the eye of a black hurricane. He began the ceremony to close the portal, but was met with resistance. The medicine man heard a voice from the swirling mass, telling him that only the one who summoned the evil could close the portal. However, he continued the ceremony, and the mass started to diminish and eventually disappeared. Blessing the room with sage and corn pollen, he attached the burnt log to the top of the interior of the closet and sealed the door with ash. He warned my grandma that whatever was summoned was evil and too strong to keep under control, and so his recommendation was that my uncle abandon the house. Despite the warnings, my aunt, her boyfriend, and their 3-year-old son moved into the house, believing it to be a perfectly good place to save money on rent payments. However, they soon encountered paranormal experiences. One evening, my aunt heard footsteps walking down the hallway, followed by something crawling into bed with her and her son. Whatever it was, quickly got out of bed, threw off the covers, and stepped on her boyfriend's neck, causing him to choke for air. They then decided to leave the house immediately, leaving their belongings behind. Later, my younger uncle Max and his friend Leo decided to spend the night at the house to investigate. While they were there, they experienced a terrifying encounter with different spirits, including that of a little girl and a faceless figure, making them flee the house in fear. Even after these encounters, the house has remained vacant, with strange occurrences continuing to happen, such as lights turning on despite the lack of electricity. Despite the warnings and strange events, the house stands abandoned, with its curtains drawing open, as if someone is still inside, watching. This is my true Skinwalker story. At the time of this experience, I had no knowledge, nor had I ever heard about a Skinwalker. I was 19 years old, and I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, with my parents while attending community college. My sister-in-law had asked me to go with her to Tuba City, Arizona, to visit with her mother and pick up some papers. Her mother was a school teacher there on the Navajo REZ. We would be staying there overnight. Her mother lived in one of those small government houses on the REZ. There were about 3 or 4 houses near her on a small paved street, except for a few buildings near there. It was pretty isolated. My niece and nephew were with us, and we'll call my sister-in-law Mary, my nephew Mike, and my niece Amy. Mike was only 10 years old, and Amy was 9. It was early evening when we arrived in Tuba City. We had stopped at a fast food restaurant on the way to pick up dinner to go. After arriving at the house, we all laid together at a small kitchen table,
We talked and visited a while before going into the small living room to watch TV. There wasn't a lot to do there, so Mary and I decided we would take a night drive and explore around the REZ. I know what you're thinking. It's a very bad idea, or a stupid idea. We drove around for about an hour and a half. Surprisingly, nothing weird happened. We were just laughing, talking, and listening to music as we drove up and down the dirt roads. After a while, we decided to head back. When arriving back home, we stayed up a little bit later, and then we decided it was time to go to bed. I slept in a small back bedroom on a twin bed next to a window with blinds. My nephew Mike slept on the floor in a sleeping bag in the same room. Mary and Amy were in the other room down the hallway. During the night, I was awakened by some strange, scratchy noises outside the window by my bed. It sounded like something was making long, slow clawing sounds down the window, like when someone runs their nails down a chalkboard. I am a light sleeper, so this of course woke me up. I whispered out loud to my nephew Mike to wake up, asking him if he was hearing the same thing I was. Mike was sleepy and groggy, being awakened from a deep slumber, so he seemed confused at first. I asked him again if he had heard the scratching noise, but he didn't answer. He was just out of it. He then laid back down and was out like a light. I was perplexed and a little scared. I thought to myself maybe it was just a stray cat or dog, but I couldn't figure it out. I did, however, have no indication to look out that window, so I just lay there listening. After a few minutes, the clawing stopped. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I mentioned this at the kitchen table during breakfast, but no one seemed very interested. We left later that afternoon, and I never even thought about it again. 6 months later, I was attending one of my college courses. The teacher was lecturing us about different legends and stories of the Navajo people. He touched on the stories of evil medicine men, or witches, that are called skinwalkers. He began telling us that they are very dangerous and harmful. They have the ability to turn into or disguise themselves as any animal. They could take the form of a coyote, wolf, or even a bear. They also been known to follow people home at night. That's why you should never be out on the REZ after dark. You're never supposed to make eye contact with the skinwalker, because they can actually possess your soul. You should never talk about them, because you can draw them to you. They can cause issues and bring evil into your life. An icy chill went down my spine. I remember that night I had spent on the REZ. I wonder if a skinwalker had followed Mary and me home that night after our drive. The realization that a skinwalker had targeted us fills me with fear. I think of this often, and I'm so glad I didn't look out the window that night. I'm also haunted by the fact that there was just a very thin pane of glass separating me from such an evil thing. And now, I guess I know why no one in the family wanted to talk about it. Then I heard some shuffling, and I saw that thing moving through the woods. It was strange, jagged, and tense. I can't even describe it. It just felt wrong. It was tall and thin. Its bones were rubbing up against its skin. It seemed very malnourished. It shifted back and forth as if it was looking for something. When it turned its face, the grace of the moonlight revealed its features. It was disturbing. It had an elongated chin and small eyes, dark folds of skin around them. The skin was darkish gray. Its mouth was large. It spread all the way across its face. It had its teeth jagged and broken. Its mouth and nose was covered in blood and also in chunks of meat. The blood trailed down and covered its torso. I was about 10 yards away from it, and it crawled on all fours. It started to come towards me. Closer and closer. I could smell it. It smelled like roadkill. That's when I threw up in my mouth and held my breath. My hope at this point was that my death would come quickly. I still had some hope that I would make it out alive. But suddenly, this thing started speaking.
James, James, James.
In the most ungodly voice I ever fucking heard. The part that made my hope disappear was when it started saying my name in my friend's voice.
James, James, James.
It wasn't just like his. It had two tones, one deep and the other my friend's voice. It kept saying this and it crawled away through the woods, back up the hill. I stayed there for I don't know how long. I cried silently, and for some reason, I started moving my hand around, and I found something. It was cold and rectangular. I looked closer. It was the lighter that belonged to Drew, and my flashlight had broken on my fall. I stood up slowly and grabbed my bag. I turned and slung it into the woods and ran towards the parking lot. It started screaming my name, but this time, it sounded demonic. This time it was no longer my friend's voice. I kept running and I didn't recognize anything. I flicked the lighter of Drew and scanned the area. My hand ended up hitting something. It was a sign, and with the lighter I read, National Forest. I looked back and heard that same screech, and I ran through the tree line. At a distance I saw my truck. I ran as much as I could, and when I got there I flung the door open and jumped into my truck and started it. I flipped my gears, pulled out, and hit the gas flying out of that parking lot. As I drove, I looked back, and God, I wish I hadn't looked back. It had broken the tree line, and it noticed me driving away. It stopped in the light of the parking lot, now shown in detail. It fucking stood tall. It was at least 9 or 10 feet tall, and its face, I'll never get that picture out of my head. It looked angry, and its eyes were full of hate, and what I assumed at the moment, hungry. I put the pedal to the floor. I tore off the side road and onto the highway. I looked at myself. My jacket was torn and ripped. I was covered in dirt and had cuts and scrapes everywhere. I pulled up to the police station, and according to what information I had gotten, it took a while for the cops to stop me from screaming about that it had killed Drew. A bunch of men got together the next day and rounded up a search party, with the sheriff leading the search. I ended up refusing to go. They scaled through the mountain and searched for my friend. It was nighttime when they found him. He was barely recognizable, they said. They found him under a log. His eyes had been ripped out. His tongue was forcefully pulled out. His arms and legs had been mauled. He had been gutted, and his genitals had been cut off. And his face, they told me his face was scratched and seemed to have been chewed down to the bones. And his neck had been broken in so many places. I can't even express through here how terrible I feel for running and not trying to help him. I still remember his tears streaming down his face before he was dragged away from me. On paper it was reported as a bear attack. After the incident, my grandfather came and talked to me. He said, "I'm so sorry about what happened to your friend. All the people in my town know the existence of that thing. I heard countless stories of local hunters that have came across it." It's been about 8 years. I'm 25 now. There is not a day that passes that I don't think of my friend. He was my best friend. I'll leave you with this warning. If you ever go camping, be careful and keep yourself armed. I never want something like this to happen to anyone. I don't even wish that experience on my worst enemy. However, I still go hunting to this day, but I warn you, never go into the woods in Arkansas. During winter, you may just find something out there that you don't want to find. And it may just be a mental thing, but sometimes at night, when it's really quiet, I can hear my friend calling my name.
My friends and I have this annual ritual. Every year, we get together and stay in a cabin up north. My friend Jake owns the cabin. Actually, it belongs to his father, but he lets us use it for a small fee. The cabin itself is incredibly nice both inside and out. Apart from having a mostly wooden exterior, and it being isolated up in the mountains, one might actually mistake it for a vacation spot. It was that time of year, and we all got together once again. Over the past years, it's just been me, Jake, and our two other friends, Chris and Mike. We started doing this yearly thing about 5 years ago when we all graduated from high school. We worried that we would lose touch with each other, and that we wouldn't see each other anymore, so we all agreed to meet up once a year and spend the weekend together. The first year was a bit rocky. Mike couldn't make it because he was being extremely overworked without being able to get any time off, so it was just Jake, Chris, and I. We didn't do a lot. We mostly just watched movies, played some video games, and ate all the junk food we had brought with us. The following year was much better. On this time, we all got time off from work and met up on the mountain. We almost broke our necks because we were sledding while intoxicated. We still played video games for most of the weekend, but before we left, Mike had felt bad about the previous year, so he brought a truckload of fireworks with him. We spent our last night there blowing up snow hills and filling the night sky with an incredible show of colors. The next year, we threw a large party up on the mountain. We had invited coworkers, old friends, and it was the first year I had brought Nikki with me. We had just started dating, and since we were inviting pretty much everyone we knew, I figure, well, what the hell, right? Everyone had a great time, or so they told me. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of party games, and a broken wooden deer carving that we had to pay Jake's dad back for it. But overall, it was a great time. Last year, we chose to limit the amount of people. We could only bring one additional person with us, just to keep the alcohol intake and damages to a minimum. Jake, Mike, and I all each brought our girlfriends. Chris, on the other hand, came alone. Anyways, as we spent that weekend watching old scary movies, playing board games, and taking hikes through the snowy wilderness, overall, it was a pretty good time. Last week, however, was anything but good. While Nikki and I were making our way up to the mountains, we had received a warning that a massive blizzard was heading our way. She gave me a nervous glance, but it had snowed up there lots of times before, and I told her not to worry about it. We had just arrived when the snowfall began to pick up. We grabbed our things and quickly dashed inside. We found Mike and Chris setting up a video game, and Jake in the kitchen putting away the food he had brought. I greeted them, then inquired to where their better halves were. They all said, almost in comical fashion, working. I laughed at the coincidence and took my jacket off. I asked Jake if he had seen the weather. He nodded, saying that we were going to get a few feet of snow, but nothing major. So we quickly settled in. After a few hours of watching Chris stomp Mike in Street Fighter, we all decided to watch some movies Jake had brought with him. His famous collection of scary movies, which I wasn't actually interested in. But of course, I was outvoted. While they put on the first movie, I stared out the window watching the endless snowfall outside. The sky was already darkened from the clouds overhead, but was now becoming much darker as the sun started going down. But something caught my attention through the flurry of snow. I wasn't sure, but I thought I saw someone standing out there. I blinked my eyes, and whatever it was wasn't there anymore. Thinking it was just the snow playing tricks on me, I rejoined everyone at the TV. About an hour into the film, Nikki had to use the bathroom, and a few moments later, we all jumped up to her screaming. Everyone else gave each other confused glances. As I ran to the bathroom, I found Nikki standing outside of the bathroom door. I asked what was wrong, and she just pointed to the window. She said that she saw something staring at her through the glass. Being the good boyfriend that I am, I puffed up my chest and walked over to the window. Looking closely through it, the only thing I could see was a thick layer of snow falling from the sky. By that point, our friends had joined us, and she told them what she saw. They all thought the movie had gotten to her, but I couldn't help but think about when I saw something standing outside as well. We decided to call it a night, and each retired to our respective rooms. Throughout the night, Nikki just kept glancing out of the window. I told her to relax. If it was somebody, there were 5 of us, and only one of them. This actually helped her calm down a bit. A couple of hours after we fell asleep, I was awoken to a tapping coming from the window. I cracked my eyes slightly open. On the other side of the glass was a face. It didn't look human. Its head was as white as the snow falling all around it, which contrasted the darkness outside. Its eyes were white and vacant, almost as if it were blind. A long, clawed hand tapped a pointed finger on the glass. It seemed like it was trying to get our attention, but the way it moved its head as it tapped made it seem like it had never touched glass before. After a few minutes of watching it, it slowly stepped backwards away from the window and faded from view. I immediately shook Nikki awake and told her what I saw. I could see the panic in her eyes slowly start to build as I described it. She told me that was exactly what she had seen in the bathroom. We quickly got up and woke the others, explaining what I saw. They were all skeptical. They all didn't really believe us, but I told them that we needed to leave now. While everyone else was packing their things, I walked over to the door and opened it. Even though what I saw on the other side had stopped me in my tracks, there was a pile of snow about halfway up the door. I looked over the mound of snow and saw that our trucks had mostly been buried by the blizzard. I struggled to shut the door, but when I did, something happened that made us all stop what we were doing. There was a knock on the door. We all looked at each other, unsure of what to do. I locked the door quickly and told Chris to lock the back door. He nodded and ran off. We all stayed together in the living room, keeping our eyes fixed on the doors and windows. Nikki pulled out her cell phone, but with the bad weather and remote location, that was just wishful thinking. Mike started to shout in fear, and we all looked in the direction he was staring at. It was the window right next to the back door. That same ghostly white face was on the other side. It tapped on the window, then began to pound on it. The glass then began fracturing all over. Thinking quickly, I led everyone upstairs to the master bedroom. We all poured inside and locked the door behind us. I could hear the glass break shortly after. We all held our breath as we waited. A few minutes later, the sound of something could be heard below us. Then, everything went quiet. We looked to one another, not sure if we should check to see if it was gone or not. And Jake stood up and walked over to the door, but just as he went to reach for the lock, a faint tapping was heard on the other side. We all sat there motionless, hoping that whatever it was would get bored and just leave us alone. A few hours passed as we waited, and not a sound was heard. I got up and walked over to the door. I pressed my ear to the wood, and I could hear very soft breathing on the other side. I'm not sure why, but this out of everything scared me the most. That this fucking creature had been standing there, waiting for hours without making a single noise. Eventually, the sun began to rise, and the blizzard had finally died down. Chris, Jake, Mike, and I decided we would try to make a quick run to our trucks. We were going to force the door open and charge at whatever that thing was. Nikki, of course, advised against it, but we didn't have much of a choice. I counted to 3 and pulled the door open, but when I did, the creature was gone. We slowly crept downstairs and found all of our stuff was trashed. Our bags were torn open. The door to the fridge was practically torn from the hinges, and all the food was thrown everywhere around the cabin. We spent the morning shoveling our trucks out enough to drive out of there, and we all quickly left after that. We have no idea what that thing was, or what it actually wanted, but we all decided to postpone next year's trip to the cabin. If it's snowing outside at night, and you hear a tap on your window, get up and find somewhere safe. We were all very lucky, but if we hadn't been on the second floor with the door locked, I most likely wouldn't be writing this right now. I grew up in a small town just north of Anchorage, Alaska. My family had moved there only a few months after I was born. My father was a very outdoorsman. He grew up very traditional. His father and grandfather took him hunting and fishing whenever they could. They would spend so much time outdoors. In fact, going into town felt almost alien to them, or so my father liked to say. He grew up in Washington State, so he was already pretty much accustomed to the dense foliage that we live by today. Unlike his father or grandfather, who were both blue-collar men, he went to college and got a degree in engineering. In a job interview, he was so flustered by his nerves he couldn't seem to answer the questions correctly. He said it was a miracle that he even got the job. Of course, my mother likes to remind him of how awkward his interview was, as she's the only one that had interviewed him. My mother worked as a hiring manager for an engineering company in Washington. After a few years, my parents had gotten married, and a few more years after, I was well on the way. Their company was branching out to Alaska, and were asking for volunteers if anybody would be willing to relocate. My father jumped at the opportunity, much to my mother's surprise. They both made the trip, and after getting settled a few months later, I was born. Throughout most of my younger days, my father would always seem to find time to take me camping and fishing. Once I had gotten a little bit older, he began to take me hunting as well. I didn't really enjoy the act of hunting, but my father was so excited about bonding that I didn't have the heart to tell him. Years flew by, and every summer, it would be me and him trekking over mountains and through dense brush. For my 16th birthday, he and I spent an entire week out in the forest. It might not be the greatest birthday present for some of you, but that's what my family life consisted of, so it wasn't too bad. Sometime after my 18th birthday, my father had an unfortunate accident at work. He had a piece of sheet metal fall on him and injure his back. He was laid up in a hospital for almost a month, but thankfully wasn't in any danger. Once he was cleared to come home, he spent the majority of his time on the couch. His birthday was coming up soon. She asked me if I would be willing to go hunt something as a gift for my dad. I thought about it for a bit. Well, I hadn't gone hunting by myself before. I had gotten my license and knew all the procedures involved. I have also gone hunting almost every year since I was old enough to. I agreed and told my mom I would try to bring something back, but not to get her hopes up. She thanked me, and after a week or so, I had gotten everything that I needed. I packed up my truck, grabbed my rifle, and headed out. I drove about an hour and a half to our usual spot to begin our hunting. I hopped out of my truck, grabbed my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began walking. Some of you might be surprised to find that the summer months can be pretty warm in Alaska. I have met visitors who were under the impression that Alaska was a winter wonderland all year round. And while that may be the case for some of the parts in Alaska, like further up north, it's not always true further south. It was a clear, sunny day overhead, and so I pushed my way through the thick brush. It seemed like a million mosquitoes wanted to take me down before I even got started. As I hiked further inward, keeping a close eye on my surroundings, I started to feel as if every animal was aware of my presence. My father was a better tracker than I was. I was mostly a few steps behind him, always staying quiet. During my journey, however, I caught a few indications of wildlife nearby, but they had long since fled upon my arrival. Eventually, the bright sun overhead grew dimmer and dimmer as I kept walking. I knew it would be far too dark to hunt soon, so instead, I began searching for a spot to set up camp. After hiking for a few more minutes, I came across a flat area. It seemed like a good place to set up for the night. I unhooked my tent from my pack and began setting it up. Being a one-person tent, it didn't take very long. While I still had a little bit of daylight left, I gathered up some twigs and branches that I could and built myself a small fire just outside of my tent. Not necessarily for keeping warm, but more to keep the insects away. Once I had a fire going, I started to relax, sitting just outside of my tent, taking in my surroundings more intently. There is this feeling that is present when you're in the wilderness by yourself, of peace and quiet. On the other hand, there is also an ever-present danger as well. I try not to think of the latter as I got ready to go to sleep. About 3 hours after I had fallen asleep, I was awoken by a noise nearby. It was the cracking of twigs and the rustling of grass. I cracked an eye open, trying to remain as still as possible, but it was hard to discern what had caused the noise in the first place. I listened close as my sluggish mind became sharper. The faint noise grew louder and louder as it approached my tent. The smell of my campfire filled the air around me. I wondered if it was a bear, curiously wandering about. If that were the case, I didn't want to make any sudden movements. Either way, I waited for around 10 minutes, listening intently for any more sounds, but I didn't hear anything else. After a few more moments of silence, I began to get back into my sleeping bag, and I was once again on the edge of falling asleep. But then, another broken twig forced my eyes open again. I was just about to get up and poke my head outside of the tent when I heard something else. A voice in the darkness. It sounded like a child, a small boy, and it simply said, "Hello." Even though I wasn't moving, I felt my body tense up. Another step sounded outside of the tent, and the voice repeated once more, "Hello? Hello?" This time I noticed something very off-putting about the greeting, apart from the fact that there might have been a child in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, in the middle of the night. The thing that was off-putting was that the hellos were perfectly identical, almost like it was a recording of some kind. When I heard it, I grabbed my rifle, which was lying next to me, and I gripped it tightly. After another moment, I could hear faint breathing coming from the other side of my tent. The voice sounded a third time, and when it did, I immediately sat up in my tent, trying to make as little noise as possible, and I readied my rifle at the direction of the voice. I could feel sweat beginning to drip down and sting my eyes as I tried to remain calm. I tried to think of a response to this voice, and I could only manage to say, "Who's there?" As soon as those words left my mouth, dark claws dug into my tent. The violent sound of tearing fabric filled the tent. Through the newly formed holes, I saw what was making that noise, and it definitely wasn't a child. Its skin was a darkened ash, and its eyes were a stark white. Its head was completely bald, but was covered in multiple pockmarks and scratches. A jaw hung slack with slime dripping from it. Upon seeing this thing, my brain only repeated one single word over and over again, a word which I hadn't used in fear since I was a child. Monster. My shaking hand squeezed the trigger, and a ring filled my ears. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see whatever it was stumble backward and collapse under the ground. As the ringing faded in and out, I could hear this thing coughing and wheezing violently. I scrambled to my feet and racked the bolt on my rifle as I forced my way out of what was left of my tent, ready to finish it off. But it was gone. I fearfully scanned the area, keeping my eyes peeled. There was no sign of the creature aside from a small pool of blood in the dirt nearby. I stepped back into my tent and gathered up everything as fast as I could, before quickly making my way back towards my truck. The thought of me not making it out of the woods alive crossed my mind plenty of times as I jogged. Lucky for me, after only an hour of moving through the woods, the faint light of the sun began cresting on the horizon. It was enough to make my journey back a little bit easier. I found my truck and drove out of the woods like a bat out of hell, and made it home soon after. When I got home, I told my mother that I had been unsuccessful in my hunting. She thanked me for trying regardless. My father chimed in from the couch, saying that it would have been different if he had been there. And that might have been true. Even though my father had been injured at his job, I take it as a blessing. A blessing that he won't be going hunting again for a very long time. As for me, well, I don't plan on ever going back into the Alaskan wilderness anytime soon. And if any of you out there are planning a trip, I would highly advise against it. There's something evil living out there in those woods. Something you don't ever want to see for yourself. My name is David Hernandez, and what I'm going to share with you is the most terrifying experience I have ever lived. This story happened a few years ago. At that time, I lived in a place called San Jose Paso Nuevo, very close to the Cofre de Perote, in a very small town with only a few houses, and it's very quiet. Unfortunately, in this place, I lived through a terrifying experience. One that has to do with an encounter with a nahual. For several months, many people began to report that their animals were disappearing. There was no logical explanation, because even animals disappear during the day. This was a very serious situation, because as I mentioned, it's a fairly poor area. Losing an animal means losing a lot of money. People gather in the classroom of Don Agustin, the oldest man in the town. They began to organize to deal with all this. Some people thought it was someone from a nearby community, intending to take the animals, while others thought it was a coyote from the area. Fed up with the situation, people started to stand guard at night near the pens to catch the culprit. The first few nights, the men who stood guard swear that something made them fall deeply asleep. When they woke up, they realized that the 2 pigs were missing. Angry and upset, they began to count the lost animals in the village, and realized that a total of 52 were missing. The most affected by the situation was a man by the name of Humberto. This man had lost about 35 animals from his property, which was near the town limits by the mountain. This led people to think that maybe it was some sort of predator from the Cofre de Perote attacking the poor animals. To confirm this theory, there was the testimony of Humberto's wife. The lady recounted that one night, she went out because she heard the dogs barking. She walked around carefully and realized that a strange creature was on top of the perimeter fence. This was unlikely because the fence was almost 3 meters high, but this animal was on top and seemed to be some sort of dog. When the lady approached it, the animal jumped and ran off into the darkness. The lady told the story to the people of the town, and her husband offered a large sum of money to whoever kills this beast. My family was always short of money, so I was one of those who volunteered to stand guard on his property. That night, at around 1:30 in the morning, We were watching the goat pen because it seemed that those animals were more like. The pen was made out of stone with adobe, and we were just behind it. Soon, some of our companions fell asleep, and we didn't know how it happened. We were talking and out of nowhere, they just fell asleep. Those of us who were awake began to hear a strange noise, and we decided to prepare the weapons because we had confirmed that it was just a coyote. Maybe this was the reason why everyone else fell asleep, because in my town, it is said that these animals have some kind of witchcraft power. We were getting ready to face one, or maybe several coyotes, but we were not ready to face whatever it was that appeared before us. We heard heavy footsteps, and they were gradually getting closer. It was near, and that's when we saw it. A huge creature, gray in color. It was crouching just in front of the pen. I can't explain it. This animal was maybe about 1.5 meters tall in that position, and just when we thought that its size was incredible, we were in for another big surprise. The thing stood up, and its eyes were completely white. It had only one ear and a very slack jaw. Its fangs were visible, even more so with that ugly mouth, and it looked extremely thin with fairly short fur and claws about 10 or 15 centimeters long. We didn't know what to do, and we had heard stories of nahuales from our grandparents, but it had been years since such a creature had manifested in this area. I couldn't believe a single finger. I was paralyzed with fear, just like everybody else. It stared at us for about 5 minutes, and I swear, those minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, after being completely still, the creature began to move its head up and down. In a matter of seconds, it leaped into the pen, and that made us react, so we got ready to shoot it, but all of our guns jammed. This creature lifted 2 goats and ran off. We reacted a few seconds later and started the pursuit. We were guided by the sound emitted by the goats, and the creature was headed towards the Cofre de Perote. Some of us ran while others went on horseback. Obviously, the latter group got there first. They arrived where the trail disappeared, and we arrived about 30 minutes later. Those who were already there told us that the strange creature had entered a cave about 10 meters away. I don't think anyone in the town knew of its location, because if it weren't for this situation, we would have never found the cave. We were guarding the entrance, but nothing happened. Hours passed, and it was dawn when those who had gone on horseback returned for Mr. Humberto. They told him what happened the previous night, and the priest of the town came down to the cave around 8 in the morning. He was told about the events of the previous night, and the priest blessed the place. As soon as he started blessing the place, we began to hear a man crying. The priest told us not to be tricked by it. It was a trick from the Nahual. When the priest finished praying, that's when the loud screams joined by curses were heard. We ended up deciding to seal the entrance with rocks and place several protections that the town's priest gave us. We stood guard there for 2 more nights just to make sure that it didn't come out. And during that time, we heard the same howling several times. It seemed like an animal was trapped in the cave, and all we could hear was its desperate attempts to escape. A few days had passed, and a lady with a baby in her arms came looking for her husband. She was from a nearby town called Tonalco, and she said her husband hadn't come home for several days. The last time he left, he said he was going to San Jose Paso Nuevo to buy some animals. We didn't know what to tell her. We asked what her husband did, and she replied that he bought and sold animals. She confessed that their financial situation had improved only a few months ago because they were very poor. But since her husband started this business with a friend, things had been better for them. There was no doubt in anybody's mind that this man was the same Nahual that had been stealing the animals. We told the lady that we didn't know anything about her husband. Sadly, she returned to her town, and from that day on, weird things started happening in the town. During the night times, people would hear weird noises. In the middle of the night, in the streets. They said they would see strange black birds perched on the roofs of the houses, and a horrible smell of rotting flesh in the early hours. To make matters worse, many people returning from work late at night would claim to see a man dressed in black walking towards that cave. The priest said that the man was the same one who came to visit his son after having experienced all this. I eventually decided to move, for I became very afraid, and every night I dreamed of that creature that I saw. I ended up asking for help from a relative who lives in Costa Rica, and he kindly let me live with him. From here, I share my story with you, and I swear, it's not a joke. If you visit the town of San Jose Paso Nuevo, you can hear the same exact story from the mouth of many people.
I'm still freaking the fuck over what happened this last weekend. I think it's still out there. I fucking hope so. This all began a few months ago when I moved here from Eastern Washington to attend a university. I recently turned 21, but I didn't have any friends around to celebrate. So I did the next best thing, rolled a blunt, and ended up watching some stuff on Hulu. I'm living the life here. Recreational weed, undeclared major, living off my savings. And finally, no more parents nagging at my door to do something with my life. Or at least I thought so. The first time I heard it, I thought I was paranoid. I smoke a ton of pot, and living in a new city doesn't help either. People say I live in the party area of downtown. Belltown, I think they call it. It just seems like an endless parade of people and drug street kids skulking at all times of night. And to be honest, it doesn't really bother me that much. I drown that shit out with headphones anyways. I much prefer it to that cold, deafening silence. The silence so strong you start realizing just how bad your situation actually is. A silence that conjures nightmare creatures from the deepest reaches of your mind to explain the occasional noise and the environment of a quiet house. It was in that silence that I heard it. I was grinding some bud for my third bowl of the night when I noticed the empty quiet that filled the space outside of my apartment. I'm on the ground floor, so I'm basically used to all types of screaming, singing, arguing, and fighting when the sun goes down. But not now. Not tonight. There was nothing. It came from the window in my quote-unquote kitchen, because it's literally 2 burners and a mini fridge with a microwave on top. Despite what you know or think about stoner stereotypes, I'm pretty fucking immaculate when it comes to cleaning too. That's why I was puzzled when I investigated the sound. Small amounts of dirt speckle across the small excuse for a counter under the window. The window was closed. I cleaned off the counter and figured I was too high to remember making that mess earlier. Fear was overcome by a wave of relaxation when I hit my pipe. Purple Kush. Family Guy eased me into a coma, and by the morning, I didn't even bother thinking about the noise from the night before. But from then on, it kept happening. Night after night, after night. The same 3. Always at different times too. 1 o'clock, 2:45, 1:37, 3:40. There wasn't really a pattern to it, just the same weird interval of scratches. It seemed to be getting faster every time. I just started assuming it was someone fucking with me. Maybe some guys picked a place to fuck with every night after they left the bar, and I just happened to get lucky. This explanation would actually help me calm down, and I was eventually convinced that this was all it was. I still didn't have any friends here, and with the cold snap and rain, I didn't really feel like going out and making any yet. The school semester was almost over, and I noticed that I wasn't getting enough sleep. The scratching was getting louder now, and joke or not, I had to get some rest before finals week. One of my classmates suggested going camping. She even offered to let me use her tent and sleeping bag. She said that getting out of the city once in a while and being in nature helps calm the mind. Kinda hippie sounding, but I was stoned when she said it. I took up the offer and made a reservation at the campground. I'm not gonna mention where at, because it might still be down there, waiting for someone. The girl from my class met me at a Starbucks downtown and gave me her camping gear. I really appreciated the kindness, but I'm not sure if my high as fuck monotone voice and glossy red eyes convey any evidence of that. Didn't matter anyways. I packed a couple grams of bud, my pipe, and my old camera. I got inspired by all the Milky Way pictures that people post online, and sleep or not, that was my mission now. The trip out to the park was long. I saw maybe one gas station for 20 miles, and I ate my snacks on the way there. I stopped there to re-up the trail mix and Cliff Bars and Muscle Milks before I continue on my way. The clerk looked Native American, kinda old too. He had this weird look in his eyes when I approached him, as if he was about to say something but cut himself off, and silently rang up my tasty treats. It was his eyes, though, that bothered me. He had this look of sympathy, and dread, and sadness, all in one. Maybe I was analyzing the situation too hard, but it seemed like he wanted to tell me something. Whatever though, I had a galaxy to photograph. The campsite was okay. I pitched the tent fast even though some of the poles were missing, and didn't snap all the way. I took a hit off my pipe and looked up at the sky, camera in hand ready to snap that winning Milky Way shot. Clouds. Nothing but a fucking gray sky. Too tired to drive, I got in the tent and listened to a podcast from my phone speakers. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I did, eventually. And then, I woke up. It was scratching at the fucking tent. Get the fuck off my tent, douchebags. And again, I was met with that cold silence. No one responded. I was somewhat paralyzed from fear, but in that brief moment, I checked my phone to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I refreshed the news app and saw it update in real time. Kind of a dumb way to check that everything is okay. But I guess it doesn't matter when... All around the tent, I heard it scratching and scratching to a point where I thought I was just going insane. My heart pounded out of my chest, and my anxiety was at the highest point it's ever been my entire life. Each passing moment of silence felt like another calm to a storm of horror. The scratching in my imagination. I couldn't get out of the tent. I couldn't speak. I waited and waited. It continued, scratching faster and faster, and suddenly, I heard something.
My tent. My...
The way it spoke. Definitely not normal sounding for a person. The fact I was even questioning the humanity in its voice was reason enough to piss myself, which I did. For a grown-ass man, I was on the verge of tears. This was too much. I grabbed my car keys and phone, and weed, and unzipped the front flap. I bolted to the car, not looking back as I ran. The keys fumbled around the lock and I could hear something behind me. Turning. It sounded huge, but it sounded like it was on 2 feet. The key slid in, and that's when I remember I had a clicker. It was in this moment of dumb realization. I got the ignition started, turned the high beams on, and reversed out of my spot to hightail it out of the camp. Nothing in front of me. I peeked the rear view mirror before hitting the gas, only to see 2 long, hair-covered legs, lit up by my brake lights, making giant strides towards my rear window. I stomped on the pedal, whatever it was trying to catch up to me, but it gave up after I approached about 60 miles per hour. The drive back was a relief, and a part of me still could not believe what happened. When I got home, it was already morning. The sun was up, and I could see people staggering back from bars and nightclubs. It was a moment of relief. I felt a little back to normal until I got out of the car to get the supplies. Huge gashes were scratched into the window and door, and my tailpipe was slightly bent. At least I'm not crazy, I thought. I lifted up the rear hatch, and that's when I realized I forgot that I abandoned that girl's camping gear out in the campsite. My stomach dropped. There's no way she would believe my story. But that's when I noticed something else in the back seat of my car. Dirt. Small mounts of it speckle across the floor and seats. I'm writing this from home, and as an update, it's 4:53 p.m. And I just want to let y'all know, it's back. I have talked about my road trip on here before. I took the first vacation of my life last year. A rebuilt Yamaha and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States. Being adventurous seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I love Seattle with the hip original hippie neighborhoods and the carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. Getting out of Seattle was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times, despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders. And boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off the service road, and then a few crooked unpaved roads off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples from a previous campground, I did my travel log on my video camera before turning in for the night. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I can't recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it was. That's when I sat up, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. That's when something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly, I was more awake now than I had ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, just snuffle around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling what kind I was dealing with. Should I shout out or play dead? I was about 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The zipper of the tent seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it slowly and slowly. After getting it to be fully open, I slowly went outside. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. However, I had this feeling that something was watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know that something had its eyes on me out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone. I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loud. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse, but also human poop. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting killed or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps and gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had fingers. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the outhouse for ventilation. Through the top, I could hear the heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I'm an idiot. There was no way to tell time. That's when the same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello? Silence. Maybe this person didn't hear me. But then, hello? I could have shit myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice sounded like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on an empty space. I'm sorry. I thought I was alone, I said. I am alone. Every syllable was off. Hey, I'm sorry, I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else out here. Sorry, I'm here. You would think that if I knew it was another camper, I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. Hey, you scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I am something. There are more. The words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. And from its odd speech, I guess English wasn't his first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean? Because I'm going to be in here for a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't even open the door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Its English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Hey, look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I'm not gonna come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace.
You need to be gone. I promise you, I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning.
Fear closed my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more he did, and I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I'm sure that made me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to him, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like he was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or was something else. The way he was speaking, and the way his words were coming out, and the tone and voice, there was no doubt that he was going to carry out what he was saying. I kept my hands on the bolt, while they cramped on the first rays of sun, crept through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hey, are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I had kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof like that of a horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I gone to bed, and the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same, some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travel log video. It was my own.